And we have, let me just pull up my other screen here. We have some wonderful guests with us today. So we've got Christina Lopez from the Center for Educational Innovation at the University of Minnesota. We also have with us Holly Skamm. Holly's a digital learning coordinator at Bloomington Public Schools, and Rebecca Brower, who's assistant principal at New Code Academy, which is a K-12 school in Bloomington Public Schools. So we're going to do a panel today, and we are going to discuss HyFlex from the higher education side of the fence and online learning from the K-12 side of things. So welcome, and thank you so much for our panelists for agreeing to be with us today. So if we're all okay with it, I'm going to go ahead and just get started with my first question to our panelists, which is just to have them introduce themselves, tell us your name, where you work, and how you arrived at this position in your life, what brought you here. So I'll go ahead and I'll start with Chris, because I see you on my screen. It was hold your microphone closer. Thank you.
I work at the University of Minnesota, and what brought me here to this very moment is first a kind of lengthy career in teaching in higher education, and then my work in academic technology, which of course with its focus on the integration of teaching and learning and technology. And what has brought us to this new HyFlex world, I believe, is something that's been going on for a while, but also, still teaching during the pandemic.
Absolutely. Thank you, Chris. Holly, I'll have you go next.
Hi, everyone. I'm Holly Skamm. I'm the elementary digital learning coordinator for Bloomington. I've been in that role for about 7 years. And it was 2 springs ago, right when we went into emergency distance learning, that I was sitting in a Google Meet with 4 other people on my team, and we were like, what are we going to do next fall? Our families are going to need an online option. Some of our teachers are going to need an online option. And so we decided in that Google Meet, just the 4 of us, that we were going to build an online school. And at the time in Bloomington, we had online going at high school, and we were like in the talks of like, ooh, how could we talk some people into doing some online stuff at middle school? Like that seemed so risky, right? And then we were like, well, we're just going to go for it K-12 and see what happens. And so I can speak a lot today from the elementary perspective and how the heck you teach kindergartners online, what that looks like and how we've done it. But yeah, I think Rebecca and I often ask ourselves, like, how did we get to this point in our careers? I started as a 5th grade teacher, moved into the digital learning coordinator position, and now I would say that online learning at the elementary level has been the biggest surprise of my career and the most rewarding piece of my career. So I'm excited to be here today. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Holly, so much. Rebecca, go ahead.
Yeah, I think that's a perfect segue to my story. So I've been in the Bloomington Public Schools. I was a teacher, science teacher for many years at the middle school, and then did a stint of dean of students at the middle school before kind of making my way. I was a coach for a year, and then that ran into the so like a QComp coach or an instructional coach. So then that led into the year of that Holly was talking about when we went into the kind of emergency school. And at that point, Bloomington reached out and said, we were expecting about 100 kids in the middle school. We have over 300 and we don't have anyone to really run it. So given my experience at middle, I stepped in and had worked with Holly and worked with our team on building a school. And much like she said, it was this is not a spot I would have said this is where I would end up, but here I am. And so how that turned into the position I'm in this year is that a position was then created that was an administrative position, K through 12, just to oversee the whole program as it grows and as it kind of moves through these different phases of COVID being a factor, but then also, it being an option that works very well for some students and some families. So we're just working through all of that as our program continues to grow and develop. So I'm happy to be here today too.
Great. Thank you, Rebecca. So I'm going to ask the three of you, and I'll mix up the order here a little bit. So this next question is for all three of you. What do you see as kind of the three, and if you can't think of three, that's okay, but the three most significant changes in education during the last year to 18 months? So during this crazy pandemic time and everything we've been going through, what are kind of the three major things that you have seen change over the last few months? And Holly, I'll give you a chance to start this time.
Sure. So I think one, I'm just proud of our educators. Our educators had to grow leaps and bounds. And I think prior to the pandemic, I'm in tech integration, right? So that's always an area where I'm like pushing people to grow and change. And it's hard. It's very hard to turn that ship. I often call it a tanker ship, and we're like, just slowly. And then like, boom, they were all in it and they did it and they were able to do it. And so I think we learned a lot about our educators and what they can handle and what they can do. I would say we also realized that academics is a small, tiny portion of what our kids need. And, we have a big focus this year on SEL, on trauma, and just those pieces of like our kids come and we need to teach them the academics, but they come with so much more than that. And I think the pandemic let us gave us a route to say like, yep, this is real and we have to take it seriously and we have to figure out how to bring this in. And then the last piece I would say is that now, because of the pandemic, our families and our students have choices, right? They were given that online choice in the pandemic because we didn't have a choice but to provide it. And now some of them are like, ooh, I liked that choice and I hope that choice stays. And as a student or as a parent, I liked having the choice. And maybe public school system wasn't as great as I thought because now I've tried this new option and it's fitting my kids' needs better or it's fitting our family's needs better. And so I think this idea of choice has come out of the pandemic as well.
That was one of the things, Holly, just since you mentioned that was one of the things I've been wondering too. Once students have had that choice now and have had some of that flexibility, how that's impacting the demand for continuing that kind of learning model as well. So thank you. Chris, would you like to tell us about what you've seen through the U of M?
Yeah, and I think a lot of it, it's very similar to what Holly said. So for example, one thing I've noticed is there's so many more faculty and instructors who have greater facility with using technology in teaching and learning. And so I was talking with one of our directors the other day, and we were saying that, now people talk very easily about asynchronous learning, and I mean, that's really new to us. I mean, just that, they use the terminology so easily and that they've mastered a lot of the technology. I think the other thing that I noticed going into the pandemic was faculty who are expressing a lot of concern about their students in a lot of different ways. That first of all, would they be able to teach them in the way that they wanted? They were very concerned about creating community, maintaining those connections. And of course, I think during that early part, I mean, we were all dealing with so much. And, it wasn't just school that was upended. I mean, it seemed that everything was. So, I mean, I just really, and I think that sense of caring and community has stayed. And so the third thing that I'm seeing a lot more interest in, maybe, I mean, I would say it's also emerged out of this context, is a lot more interest in diversity and equity in the classroom, in our teaching, and on campus.
Thank you, Chris. Yes, I think definitely across the board too, we have seen a big uptick in the interest in diversity and equity of access and many of those inclusion issues as well. Thank you for that. Rebecca, on to you. You have the hard job because you're third, and so you have to try to
I
be
know. I
original.
was like, oh, I gotta think of something new. Yeah, so I would say, kind of going off of what Holly said about our educators and what they were able to do, we saw the same with students, right? I was in a second grade classroom today helping out a little bit, and I was amazed with what these kids are able to navigate and get to and tell me what they're doing, and like share. One second grader said to me, like, here, I'm just going to share my screen and I'll show you, right? So like these kinds of things that they're, as a 6 and 7 year old, are learning all these ways to communicate. The other thing that I feel has come out of this that is, I think, surprising to a lot of people is that these teachers who are teaching online and have their classrooms, right, are forming really deep and kind of profound relationships with the kids that are there and that are connecting. And that's not to say that they're all connecting, because there are issues, right, with kids who aren't necessarily showing up or aren't necessarily engaging in the work yet, as that's a problem that we address. But the ones that are, and the ones that are there, just report feeling so much even more connected to their teacher, and the teacher feels the same. I think it's just the many ways they have to communicate with each other, the different opportunities for one-on-one connection, the different opportunities to reach out where they're not feeling embarrassed by classmates or like who's looking at them, and so they can ask a question because they can chat it to their teacher, right? Or so we see some really interesting things coming out of the last couple years as it relates to teaching and learning online.
Thank you, Rebecca. All right, I'm going to mix it up a little bit now, and we've got a couple, because we're talking with our panelists from two kind of opposite ends of the education spectrum, if you will. We've got K-12, the earlier grades, and we've got higher education. So I'm going to kind of mix up the questions here and direct them specifically to our panelists. So Chris, would you tell our audience a little bit about how you define HyFlex, and how do you see it being different from what we might call technology enhanced courses or online courses or other things we've referred to in the past as blended learning?
Yeah, I would say the basic definition of HyFlex is that you're providing students with the option to attend.
Chris, could I interrupt you and ask you to hold your
The
mic up
microphone,
again?
yes,
Sorry.
sorry. So you're providing students with the opportunity to attend class either remotely or in person. And there might be asynchronous learning mixed into it. I mean, there could be a hybrid element, but that's the basic setup. And I would say that, I mean, currently it's, I mean, I don't believe in strict definitions of anything, but I mean, that classic definition of HyFlex has changed because we now have students who are joining remotely because they're from other countries and they can't get back into the US, or because of disability accommodations. And, of course, there are other instructors who simply thought, well, this is a good option for my students right now. So that's HyFlex right now at the University of Minnesota. And I'm sorry, could you repeat the second part of the question?
Sure. I was just wondering how you see it differently from what we've traditionally referred to as technology enhanced courses, or just regular online courses, or other what we've called blended learning models that we've had in the past. So, what are some of the differences with the HyFlex model that are newer, or more to the front, offering more opportunities for students?
I think in terms of the differences, what faculty are trying to do is manage, really, I mean, we could look at it as two learning spaces simultaneously. So you have the students who are joining remotely and the students who are in the classroom. And I wouldn't say it might not be a blend exactly. I mean, sometimes it's simply kind of making sure that they connect at various points so that everybody no matter what mode they're joining in, that they connect with the instructor, they connect with the content, and the other students. And what I've noticed about this is that, I mean, this is a new learning space, and it really requires learning. I mean, we've always had to learn new habits when we switch teaching modalities, and this is another time that, you know, instructors really have to think about what they're doing, and there's that technology flow that they need to manage while they're managing classroom flow. So I think, I mean, it's not to say that online teaching hasn't required those same adjustments. It's just that this is, well, I think another difference is that as we did when we went to remote teaching, we had to adapt. Well, instructors had to adapt, which is not how I would prefer to do things. I would say for students, it can be an opportunity, but also it can be, if you're joining remotely, if your instructor hasn't got the hang of it, then it can be to your detriment. Because, you know, as we've all experienced with hybrid meetings, the people who are online tend to be ignored. And it's really tricky to think about how to coordinate, especially if they're asking questions during lecture, or if you want to put to groups to work together. I mean, just being very mindful about connecting students across those learning spaces.
Very good, thank you. Yeah, I was, one of the things I've been wondering about it is how faculty are able to manage that balance between the students that want to come in face-to-face and the ones who prefer maybe to stay online, or who choose a different thing each week or each day of class. So that's an additional challenge. Thank you. Holly and Rebecca, from your angle, I just wanted to ask you, what types of challenges? I know, you know, we had the pandemic hit. You've both kind of talked about, you kind of sat down in a group and decided we need to form an online school, offer this opportunity. You know, what types of challenges did you face in trying to pull that together? And I'll just leave it to the two of you to, unless you don't, like, you both stay silent, I'll make one of you answer.
So I guess right away our challenge was we pretty much are our own school, but we're not funded like our own school. And so we were trying to solve the problem of like, who's the principal going to be, and who is the nurse going to be, who's the interventionist going to be, like what are all of those normal roles that a school has? How do we make that happen online? And so our solution, which I think is still we haven't worked out the kinks in, is partner schools. So for example, at the elementary level, we partnered with one of the brick and mortar elementaries in Bloomington as like our brick and mortar space. So if families needed to come get things or send things to us or send things back to us, they had a location. This year, I'm excited. We're using the brick and mortar space to offer more face-to-face opportunities. So every Wednesday, we have asynchronous learning days in the afternoon. So this year, we have like outdoor classroom crafts and a makerspace and media lab checkout and like all these fun things where families can come in face-to-face if they're comfortable with it. Of course, we have it mapped out. We're only like 10 at a time can be in a space. But I would say some challenges with the partner school aspect and is that when so the principal of the elementary school and the principal of the online, like you can't actually be a principal of two schools. And so I think Rebecca and I have learned a lot in that sense of like, you have to have really clear roles for people. And I think the partner school, that going that route was really helpful at the beginning because we just needed solutions and we needed to get the school off the ground. And so we needed some of those roles to be fulfilled with the resources we already had. But I would say moving forward, some of our learnings are, if this is going to be a sustainable program, we're going to have to look at administrative support and support in some of those roles that a normal school has that we've kind of tried to get by without.
Yeah, and I would just add to that, at the middle and high school level, we formed these partnerships with one of the brick and mortar middle schools and then with both high schools. And really what it comes down to is that you're negotiating sort of sharing support staff, right? So like the idea, the theory is like, well, we're going to share counselors with our partner school. We're going to share attendance clerks with our partner school. We're going to, right? And so theoretically that sounds good. And then when it comes down to it, and especially given I would say everybody's capacity right now just for change and for their endurance, everyone's very exhausted. And so when it comes down to that actual, okay, so attendance clerk at X high school, you are now going to take on an additional, and we don't have a huge number, but it's 88, right? So 88 more students to kind of to take on to your attendance duties. And it's been hard. It's been kind of at every turn. That partnership, right, has some things to work out. So that part I think is, there's difficulties there. There's things that are good in that, like at our middle school, and part of at our middle school right now, something that's working well is that we've partnered, the middle school received extra funding and added on some extra mental health support. So I think that helped, because then our 130 middle school students have access to that support, to that mental health support. And so I've been working hard to create a system in which, when our teachers identify need, we're able to connect them to one of these counselors or social workers or mental health workers who can really provide them support that they need. And so it's not all hard, but I mean, even that is like a negotiation, right? It's difficult for people to take on extra when it comes down to it. So I would say that's one of the parts that we're working through. We continue to work through.
I would say another big challenge, and this is probably the same like across any level, is we have teachers who are master teachers in being in a brick and mortar school, right? They know how to be an elementary teacher. They've been doing it for 10 plus years. They're good at it. They feel confident about it. All of a sudden you throw them online and they're like fish out of water, right? Like, wait a second, this best practice I've been doing for 10 years has to be tweaked to work online. And it took some time to like work through those tweaks to get to a place where, and I would say usually like last year by November is probably when our teachers started to get their footing and figure out some of those shifts and changes that you have to make. But the other things, like right when we started hiring teachers is when like all the real questions came. Like we had been planning for months and then we hired the teachers and they asked all the good questions, which was like, how are we going to get physical books in the hands of kids? How are we going to get manipulatives in the hands of kids? Like those are really important things that benefit elementary learners. We know that through research. So how are we going to do it? Because there's no option not to do it. And so we had to figure things out like material delivery and material pickup and the funding for ordering all of those materials for all those kids that can't just be shared in a classroom now. So there was a lot of challenges, logistical challenges up front that they were like coming at us like a fire hose, just like, oh gosh, I don't know how we're going to do that. I don't know how we're going to do that. All these things you just don't think about until they're right in front of you. And so what's nice about being in year 2 is that some of that we already figured out and we can just keep it. And so now I think we're able to like take on those deeper level challenges that last year we just had no time. Like it was like, yep, that's going to have to be set on the back burner for now. And this year we're able to dig a little deeper and start solving some of those other challenges now that some of the logistics are worked out.
Yeah, it never fails to amaze me. Anytime that you go to implement something new or different, all of the things that just kind of fall. It's like when I open up my hall closet in the fall and all my boots fall on my head. It's just kind of how it just feels every time you're doing something new like that. The amount of stuff that you didn't even occur to you to think about. So that's really, really helpful. Thank you. Chris, I will come back to you and ask you, what main advice would you give faculty members who are really trying to implement a HyFlex model for their courses? What are some of the things you would tell them about getting started doing it?
Well, I mean, to speak a little bit to what Holly was saying, I would say the first piece of advice I would give is to take it one step at a time as you're planning, and kind of figure out, here's the list of the things that I need to consider. Because I think when it comes to managing those situations, I mean, it can seem overwhelming if you're thinking of everything at once. I also, when it comes to the use of technology, for your sake and for the students' sake, I advise people to keep it consistent. So focus on those one or two tools that you're going to use consistently to help everybody connect. And that could be everybody gets in chat. So that means, we're using Zoom at the University of Minnesota. So that means that even people logging in, and that's a way to connect with people. And that's what you use throughout the semester. The third piece of advice that I've never really given before is to you, the group that I work with to offer a program about HyFlex-ish learning, we found some really nice templates that were developed by a professor, I think, at University of San Francisco. And what you're doing there, because you're managing these spaces simultaneously, is you're plotting out your meeting flow in your class. So you think about, what am I doing at the beginning of class? What do my students have to do, the ones who are remote, the ones who are online? And that kind of helps you get your head around coordinating all of those, technical and connection in many senses needs that everybody has. And I think, that might seem overwhelming. Oh no, I have to do this step by step. But I think that most instructors have a basic meeting flow that they use for their class anyway. So they can reuse this over and over again. And as they're doing that, I also advise them to build in times when they're going to acknowledge those remote students and take a moment to check in and make sure that they're okay. Because again, I mean, that's just a new habit that they, I think really needs some work.
Thank you. I watched a webinar the other day from some higher education people talking about HyFlex, and it was interesting to me, some of their approaches too. The one gentleman said he advises them to design it as if it were all online. In his view, it's much easier to take something that's online and adapt it to a face-to-face situation than the other way around, which I just thought was an interesting viewpoint. That was not something I had considered before either. So I just thought that was interesting. I'm wondering what you would think of that.
Actually, I had the opportunity this fall to meet with a group of instructors who had face-to-face.
We can't hear you again, Christine.
I'm sorry.
I know it's hard to remember to do that.
I had an opportunity this fall to teach a group of instructors who had never taught face-to-face because they were new to the university and they'd been teaching remotely the whole time. And so I think, again, it's a question of what habits have you developed? And, as we've heard earlier, there are teachers everywhere who've been teaching in person, and moving into a new mode throws for. So I think when you're moving things from online to face, what you're relying on is those, I guess, the routines of an in-person classroom. That, I mean, it's muscle memory. You've done this before. So for anybody, I mean, I think it's good to keep in mind whenever you're talking about any of this, what is the prior knowledge that you bring as a teacher? And how are you going to apply it in this new situation? And what do you have to change?
Good, thank you. Holly and Rebecca, you've kind of described some of this, but I wanted to give you a chance to talk a little bit more in detail about how New Code Academy got created. What kind of led you to, even to calling it New Code Academy and having that focus on it, and just what were some of the things that you had going on in the background there?
I can start and then maybe pass it to you, Rebecca, about maybe the name change and why we went that route. But like I said, we were in a Google Meet with 4 of us and we were like, should we do this? And someone was like, let's give it the weekend and then come back together Monday. And we didn't leave the meeting. We decided we're gonna do it because it felt what was right, like the right decision for students and families. So from there, it was so fast. That meeting was in March of when we all went to remote learning. And by May, I had a team of 60 elementary teachers brought together to build the program, build the curriculum, and do that all over a summer. One thing I think that one approach we tried to take that I think is so important is we said, hey, if we are given this chance to build a school from the ground up, like we have this unique chance to start over, how do we want that to look? And so we really brought together a design team of leaders, teachers, like our most innovative people I could find in our district. And we said, what can we do differently? Because we know our current system. Sorry, I have a construction truck driving by. Pause, please. We know our current system isn't perfect. So how can we address some of those challenges as we build from the ground up? We also, right around that time was when George Floyd was murdered. And so we were saying, if we could build a school from the ground up, how do we make it equitable? How do we make it just? How do we make sure all families and students are included in what we build? And so one thing we did as we built the curriculum, as we built the structures, as we built the expectations, we asked 3 questions, and those were, where does what we're about to build come from? So where does it come from? Like for example, behavior expectations. Where does what we're starting with come from? Who is it hurting and who is it helping? And so we asked those 3 questions over and over and over again as we built from the ground up. And that really led us to a good place where we are currently, even our team, constantly asking those questions of how can we do it differently? And how can we do it in a way that meets the needs of all of our kids. I will say the University of Minnesota was a huge piece of our journey. So early on, we partnered up with the LT Media Lab, Lana Peterson and Cassie Schwarber, and they helped us develop our schedule. They kind of looked at the research that was out there, which at the elementary level was like nothing, but they took what they could find and helped us build our schedule, build some of our systems and our programs. So they were huge, instrumental in the launching of our school. Throughout this school year, we started to realize like, okay, we're going to go into year 2 of this, and so is everybody around us. There's going to be online schools everywhere. So that's when we started to kind of think about what we needed to do stand out, and I'll kind of pass it to Rebecca to add on to that and then talk from her perspective about that question.
Thank you, Holly.
Yeah. So about that time, we started to talk about, the future and how do we grow a program while we maintain our core beliefs, right, about students, about equity, about teaching and learning. And so really how do we do this? So we worked with Lana and Cassie at the University of Minnesota to try to they actually were doing feedback loops. I don't think Holly said this, but they were doing iterations of feedback loops with families, with teachers, and with students throughout the year so that we were getting that feedback about what was working and what wasn't working. And that's something that we're continuing to do in our second year, but really thinking about how are we going to make this a K-12 program? And what came out of that was like, we need an identity. We need some kind of, it was called Bloomington Online School last year. And so there was we really liked Bloomington. We liked it because we could we could like shorten it and call it BOSS. And we thought that was kind of tough, right? But the point was, it was ultimately turned down as a way to include greater Minnesota and people from the other, from other parts of the Twin Cities. The idea of hanging on to the name Bloomington was put aside, and it was a big process. But inside of that process, we were pretty much asked, I would say, to become a computer science focused school, so that not only were we, the online school, but we had a focus. And so we've integrated our computer science work into all levels. It's also happening in the brick and mortar schools in Bloomington as well, but a real focus on computer science, the thinking skills that come along with that. And so I think from that, the name sort of came out of it, but the name was always very contentious. There was never, like everybody on board with it. But there it was. And then we worked with a marketing company to get the information to, out there in social media. I think we had some billboards. I mean, just to get the name out there, get what we were about out there, and just start to garner interest in the program. And Holly and I and another colleague of ours, Andrew, held information sessions throughout. We started in the spring. We held them throughout the summer for families to come and hear about the program and see if it was a good fit for what they were thinking. And then, we started year 2. So I don't know if that really hit all that you were asking, but that's sort of the pathway it took.
Part of the reason I did ask that is just because I just was so intrigued with the whole concept of the new Code Academy, and I knew about Bloomington Online from before, for a while. And so that's really just an interesting story about that journey to get there too.
Yeah.
Thank you. Chris, I'll bounce back to you and get your crystal ball out, Chris. And the Minnesota Learning Commons this year, we're studying the 60-year curriculum, which is a concept that has come out more in higher education so far, just about this idea that lifelong learning is becoming increasingly important. We've always spoken to lifelong learning, especially in our current systems, but it's really becoming, how do we adjust to this constantly changing face of the economy and the job market and all of the other things that are going on? The fact that people are living longer, probably are going to be working longer, and are going to have many chances probably within their lifetimes to reinvent themselves. So with all that said, I was just wondering, Chris, where do you see, in light of that, where do you see like HyFlex models growing in the future, or how do you see that panning out? And nobody's going to hold you to this. We're just asking, based on your experience and expertise, what you're thinking.
That is an amazing question. So I think HyFlex, once people adjust to it, because right now it's a big lift. I could see it as, first of all, promoting more place-based learning. And actually, this is not new to the University of Minnesota. Like, for instance, I learned many years ago that the occupational therapy program, one of the reasons they went online is because occupational therapists tend to stay where they went to school. And there's a shortage in rural Minnesota. I assume there still is. So I think, when it comes to, that initial education and ongoing education, if you can stay in place where your work is very context driven, that would be a wonderful opportunity. I also, when I think about HyFlex and just what's going on with learning spaces at the University of Minnesota in general, I see it as an opportunity to think about how students are educated in spaces that's not just the classroom. And I think this is something that we talked about earlier. In other words, what is the college experience? And so one of the initiatives that comes to mind is the College of Liberal Arts Career Readiness. And this is an opportunity for students to reflect on what they're learning from their liberal arts educations that they can then articulate as strengths for prospective employers. And what I love about that initiative is that students really are thinking about what they're learning, not just in the classroom, but it could be their professor recommended that they go to a talk or they go to a play or an art exhibit, and that counts as learning experience. And where I think HyFlex comes into it, I have a lot of questions about what's going to happen with our use of physical space on campus because we have a lot of classrooms. They're being used for different purposes. I mean, but and it's I don't think we can take for granted anymore that all classes are going to happen in classrooms. So then that leads me to thinking about what is the college experience? What are you learning there? And are there other spaces where students can connect and still learn? Right? I mean, it's, we have some of those in place already. It could be a student organization or just, students who have common interests. They get together all the time. And in that, if we think about the context of education differently, to me, that sets people up for lifelong learning. As they're learning, they're already thinking future. And maybe they'll be better engaged, even if they don't come back to the University of Minnesota, to look at all of the opportunities to learn that are out there. And I mean, some of it is short courses, it could be professional development in the context of their jobs. There are, lots of spaces on the web, discussion boards. There's LinkedIn Learning. I mean, there are all kinds of learning spaces that they can engage in. And so in this context, I see an opportunity to really prepare them to learn anywhere they go.
Great, thank you. I'm going to ask Holly and Rebecca a question about what advice, because we have a lot of folks here too in the call that are in higher education and that who also work with preparing our K-12 teachers as well. So what advice would you give other educators who are thinking about starting an online program or teaching in an online program? What kind of advice would you give them if someone came to you and said, I'm thinking of trying this out? What would you recommend I do?
Oh, I was waiting for Holly to see if she was going to jump in first. I think, let's see. I think it's important to know kind of as an educator, like your capacity for teaching this way, right? Because what we found is we had some teachers last year that were amazing. They were great. They were so good online. They were connecting with kids and they were right. But when the opportunity came to make a decision based on, do I go back to the classroom or do I stay online? Because they were given that choice. We had about half of our teachers, I would say half of my teachers went back to the classroom, and that was just due to the fact that they missed that energy in person, right? And that the just being in the physical proximity with students was what they found energy from in the job. So it was so that's something that I think is really important. And then there's those teachers that, since everyone kind of got thrown into it, they have some kind of experience where they can draw from and say like, no, I liked it. Like it went well for me. And I thought I liked preparing those lessons digitally and trying to figure out different ways to figure out what they know and how to show what they know, because what it does is it really forces us as educators out of a mold of what we'd kind of been doing, like with testing, right? Like here's your test, like write down what you know. You can't do that so well online. You've got to think more project based, right? You've got to think about like different ways for kids to show what they're learning and what they're connecting and what they're putting together. So I think that's really important is to kind of have some self-awareness of, how is this going to be for me in this format when you're gathering your teachers and your staff. Holly, do you want to jump in with something else while I think if there's other.
That's that's an awesome answer, because that's not something that I thought about when I asked the question as a potential thing to think about. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah, I would agree
Go
with
ahead.
everything Rebecca said. And I think just to add on to that, and we're already trying to develop these types of educators, but the ability to problem solve and the ability to be flexible and the ability to, like, that growth mindset, right? Like, you are going to constantly be faced with challenges online. Like, that is the norm. Like, if you get really easily stressed out by you know, a lot. I mean, I guess in general, a teacher has to be able to navigate that, whether they're online or face to face. But I think online adds that extra layer of like technical issues and just the things that, like, I don't know, you got to be ready for it. And I think our teachers that are that are the most successful are the ones that are like, yep, stuff's going to happen and I'm going to roll with it and it's going to be okay. So I think that growth mindset attitude, or that it's not going to be perfect right away and it's going to take time to get better. I also think, believe it or not, like, I think that teachers that, I think our teachers that are more animated, like, I want to say, like, that TV personality, like, they are killing it online in the classroom, because like Rebecca said, you don't have that environment of face to face where, like, your body movements or your physical closeness to a student, like, you don't have those classroom elements anymore. All you have is like what you're bringing on this screen, right? And so our teachers that come with that energy, come with that passion, come with that, like, you know, I don't care if I see myself on camera, like, we're gonna learn and it's gonna be great. And like, bringing that energy, I think, is really important. So I don't know what that means and how you prepare a teacher for that, but I think there's like a different type of way you have to approach online learning that requires like all of you. Like, I don't know, by the end of the day, you're tired, you're out of it. I don't know if I'm even making any sense, but that's something our research partners have noticed when they go into classrooms, is the teachers that are really keeping kids engaged are the ones that are just so animated and like bring life to the screen in a different way. So I don't know.
You know, you do raise the whole thing about the video camera too. And I think, you know, as someone who hates to see herself on video, and that's been just, you know, I've had to learn to just ignore it, really. And that is not a small hurdle to come over. So, you know, I completely understand an instructor, either K-12 or higher ed, who's like just really struggling with that, because it's not easy. That's kind of a big thing. And I think too, for kids, you know, all the questions about, do we have to have our cameras on? Or students in higher ed, do we have to have our cameras on? And, you know, there's very good reasons for, and very good reasons sometimes why not too. So, you know, that is a big question. Well, we have a few minutes here. I do want to let, we've got some wonderful people in the audience here who've been listening very quietly and patiently. And I just wanted to give an opportunity for anybody in the audience, if you'd like to ask any of our panelists a question, to please go ahead. And if you're shy about unmuting your microphone, you can just put it in the chat and we can take it from there. But I'll give you a minute to think about that, and go ahead and unmute your mic if you just want to speak.
I have a question. This is Glory from the University of University of St. Thomas, excuse me. And pardon the noise of the dogs in the background if you hear them. I've been working with Brian Beatty on HyFlex, on a HyFlex learning community. And I'm wondering what everyone's thoughts are about the definition of the flexibility part for the student, right? That students can choose whether to come in person or participate online, either asynchronously or synchronously. I know that we sometimes get pushed back. We're developing a new program that they want to call HyFlex, but it's really more multimodal. There's 2 tracks. Students can't go back and forth between the 2 tracks. So is there any thought, especially as we move out of the pandemic, on the student choice aspect of HyFlex?
I've actually read that students tend to pick one track and stick to it throughout the semester. And what I'm also hearing from some people is that more and more students are showing up remotely rather than in person. And I guess I'd be curious to know from you, I mean, how would that affect the way you teach or the way that you think about teaching?
It actually affects it quite a lot if you don't know if there's uncertainty into which mode the students are going to be in, then you have to structure things differently. Whereas if it's set up, and I think that's why this program is going with it, it's you either choose face to face or you choose online, because it's really different in how you structure the class. Now, my preference is to set it up kind of as a blended HyFlex, where a lot of the content is online asynchronously, and then for engagement sessions, I'll call it for want of a better word, once a week or however often you either come to class or you participate synchronously. But you can't always do that either, right?
Thank you, Glory, for that. That's a good question. Any other questions? I did notice there is a comment in the chat from Esther, and she makes the observation that, you know, there are students who learn better online and some who prefer to be in person and learn better that way. And most students know what kind of learner they are. And that's, you know, that's quite a good point as well. Just like as Holly and Rebecca were speaking, as a teacher has to figure out what kind of teacher they are as well.
I'd like to follow up on Glory's questions and comments.
Go ahead,
And that
Stephen.
I find very much the same thing. In my experience, faculty like to not think about the asynchronous part and think as long as they're on camera, they're HyFlex. And that's a hard thing to get past. The equipment in the room doesn't make you HyFlex. That's a hard thing to acknowledge. What I've started doing is when I tell them and ask them about HyFlex, I make sure that I also have definitions for asynchronous online, synchronous online, blended, hybrid, so that they know if they don't match the definition of HyFlex, that's fine as long as they're meeting the needs of their students.
Thank you, Stephen.
Hello, this is Peter at Fond du Lac Travel Community College, and I apologize because there's a lot of background noise in my area. Can people hear me clearly? So one of the things that I'm pondering from my perspective is this internal tension between affording more agency to the learner in terms of being able to extemporaneously choose the modality of learning versus the overhead that implies for creating a curriculum that is flexible enough to be able to accommodate not knowing the constituency of your in-person classes versus your online participants. And you know, in my teaching experience with active learning and cohort-based peer learning, I find this would be like a very large challenge to be able to accommodate that, especially teaching multiple sections per day, not really knowing in advance who is going to be able to participate in terms of cohort or peer learning in which mode.
Thank you, Peter. Any observations on Peter's comment at all? Well, we are approaching the top of the hour, so I just wanted to, first of all, give a huge thank you to our panelists, Chris and Holly and Rebecca today. Big hand clap there. Thank you so much for joining us and for being willing to share your time, expertise, and talents. And I just wanted to pause right there and just, if any of you have any any final things you'd like to say or anything that occurred to you during the questions that you didn't get a chance to say, to go ahead. So I'll just circle around, Rebecca, and I'll start with you. Any parting words for us today?
Yeah, I think that we are in a spot in our society and in our education where it feels very ready for things to shift. We were kind of shoved that way by different forces, but I am excited about that. I'm excited that there are a lot of discussions happening around, changing education, or our approaches to education, or who is the education actually serving and who isn't it serving, right? And so all of these conversations coming together kind of at the same time makes me very excited for the possibility. At the same time, it makes me nervous because what I see, we're humans, and humans go back to what we know, right? And so there was kind of this, like, we're going back to normal, when kids were going back to school, and it isn't normal. And I think we're seeing that too. So for whatever that's worth, I'm excited about the changes and the kind of opening up of the education system, and the opportunities that are presenting themselves.
Thank you, Rebecca. Chris, do you have any final things you'd like to share?
Yeah, just that,
And again, if you'd hold your mic up so we can hear
especially
you.
over the past couple of years, I've just been really struck by how deeply faculty at the University of Minnesota care about their students. And I'm sure that this has always been the case, but this is the first time that it's come up in ongoing conversations about technology and teaching and learning. And I really, I think that there's a lot of opportunity there, because that leads to further discussion about how can we do this more? And again, how can we create a more inclusive and, diversified curriculum and campus environment?
Great, thank you, Chris. Holly, I'll end with you if you have anything, any last words. I shouldn't put it that way, but any final words?
I guess my final thoughts, I think, and we've kind of hit on this, but this pandemic has given us a chance to see what could be. We are doing something we never imagined possible. Elementary kids are learning online, and they are actually learning. They're making gains. They're learning how to read. All of our kindergartners knew all of their letters and sounds by the end of last spring. And so it's working. And so I guess just a reminder to all of us who are in education and constantly trying to meet the needs of kids. Like, sometimes we don't even know what those needs are and what those possibilities are. So I guess just an encouragement to keep our minds open and keep trying to solve problems in creative ways, because there's still lots of problems to solve.
Great, thank you. Well, thanks so much, everyone, for spending time with us today. Again, I give our panelists a great big hand and a thank you. And enjoy the rest of your evening, and we'll look forward to seeing you next month for our webinar as well. Thank you.